Hello, I'm Alan Alda. Courtroom dramas are a staple of television, and we're about to shoot one in here. But this drama is going to take us to a place that's normally unreachable. In fact, it's a place that's carefully guarded, even though what goes on there is key to life-changing decisions. Decisions that get made in a criminal trial like the one that will unfold here. That normally unreachable place we'll be taken to is the human brain. The case that will play out here is a tragic one for almost everyone involved. It's a fiction. But what's not fiction is that technology now exists for peering into people's brains to see how they're thinking and even what they're thinking. And that's what we'll be doing during this trial. We'll examine the defendant, the witnesses, the jurors, even the judge, by putting surrogates for them, including me, into brain scanning machines. And we'll find out what neuroscientists are learning about how brains work when they become entangled with the law. After all, a trial is meant to get to the bottom of things, to find out what really happened when different people have different versions of events, to find out what was in people's minds when they did what they did. For hundreds of years, we've relied on the people-reading skills of judge and jury. But now brain science offers the tantalizing prospect of sharpening those skills. Introducing neuroscience into the courtroom, though, has attracted controversy. Just as an example, do you have a right to the privacy of your own thoughts? So we'll not only be exploring the science, we'll be asking what role it may one day play in a trial like this, or indeed whether it ever should. So now, as the judge and jury try to read the minds of the defendant and witnesses, we'll, in effect, be peering into the brains of all of them.
Major funding for Brains on Trial was provided by
the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, supporting original research and public understanding of science, technology, and economics.
Additional funding was provided by the Cheryl and Philip Milstein family.
All rise. Hear ye, hear ye. This courtroom
Presiding over the trial is distinguished U.S. District Judge Jed S. Rakoff, moonlighting in his own Manhattan courtroom because of his long-standing interest in neuroscience and how it may affect criminal law.
Please be seated. All right, we'll call the case of People versus Moran. We begin with an opening statement from the government.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Prosecuting counsel is Curtis Kinn, in real life a U.S. attorney from Los Angeles.
It was Friday night, around
The defense attorney is Tony Rico, well known for his work with young offenders in New York.
It started out like any other ordinary Friday night for Mr. Ahmed El Oz. He was closing up his local convenience store and gas station, a family-run business, and everything seemed just normal.
A few minutes before closing time, with just one customer still in the store, 3 young men burst in. One threatened the store owner with a gun, while another blocked the customer's escape. As the store owner was reaching for the cash register, his wife came out from the back office. The shooting left her alive, but with a serious brain injury. The events were recorded by the store's security cameras. The critical questions for the jury: who was the shooter, and was the shooting deliberate or impulsive? The result of a conscious attempt to harm, even kill, or of being startled and panicked? Jimmy Moran was one of 2 young men arrested soon after the crime. The third has vanished.
The defendant, Jimmy Moran, is holding his gun.
Prosecuting attorney Curtis Kinn's task is to convince the jury that Moran is the shooter and that the shooting justifies charges of armed robbery, aggravated assault, and attempted murder.
And after you have seen all of this evidence, and after all of you have heard all of this evidence, I will come back and ask you to return the only verdicts that is consistent with the evidence in this case, which is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of all charges.
Thank you, Mr. Kin. Mr. Rico?
Defense attorney Tony Rico's task is to sow whatever doubts he can about whether Moran was the gunman, but also to convince the jury that the shooting wasn't with intent to kill.
The facts of the case are pretty straightforward. Everything that happens here happens in a matter of less than 10 seconds that end with the storekeeper's wife being shot. For each crime that you have to consider in this case, you're going to have to decide the element of intent. That is, state of mind. Now, in order for you to find attempted murder, you have to have the state of mind to cause death. Unfortunately, as jurors, you're not able to look into the minds of the 3 young men that went into the store. If you had that ability, you'd have some type of futuristic supernatural power. But in the absence of that, you are left with having to decide the facts as they're presented. And what I would suggest to you, that as you're observing those facts and you're reviewing the facts, we're here in the security and safety of Judge Rakoff's courtroom. But these facts unfolded themselves in a highly emotional, heightened frenzy.
The first witness for the prosecution is one of the 2 arrested youths, Thomas Quinn.
So help you God. I swear.
Now, are you testifying today because you have a plea agreement with the government?
Yes, I do.
All right, now taking you to the neighborhood convenience store on that night, around 11:30 on April 4th, what did the 3 of you do?
We went into the convenience store. Me and Jimmy went straight up to the counter. Jimmy pulled out the gun on him, and we both threatened him to give us the money or else.
And then what happened next?
Then a woman came from the back. I assume it was his wife. And then Jimmy turned and he fired the gun and he shot the woman.
Do you see your friend Jimmy anywhere in here?
He's at the front desk and he's wearing green.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant, Jimmy Moran?
Yes, the record will so reflect.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Quinn, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Now, you're over the age of 20, aren't you?
Yes.
Jimmy, barely 18 on the day this event happens, isn't that right?
Yes.
You said to us that while in the store, you were yelling at the storekeeper, "Give us money or else." Right?
Yes.
Or else what?
Or else we would cause him physical harm, but Jimmy's drawing of the gun, that was his own action. I hadn't even told him to bring the gun in the first place. I didn't tell him to draw it. So that was all Jimmy.
As in every jury trial, it's up to the 12 men and women in the jury box to decide whether or not to believe Tommy Quinn's version of who fired the gun that night. His plea bargain will obviously color their opinion. But what if there were a way of telling if he's lying or telling the truth by peering directly into his brain? The question prompts my first excursion out of the courtroom to an imaging facility near Boston.
I have a task for you to do today.
Okay, great. Until recently, Steve Lakin headed up a company called CFOS. It made most of its money from doing DNA forensics. But it was also in the commercial lie detection business. I've come to see if he can catch me in a lie.
What I'm going to ask you to do is, inside this drawer, there's a ring and there's a watch. You can take one of those 2 objects, and you're going to pretend as if you didn't take either of the 2 objects, that both of the objects are still in the drawer. So at any time today, if I ask you, did you take a ring or did you take a watch, your response to both of those questions would be
No,
correct.
I didn't take,
Right.
didn't take anything. I'll say no to everything.
Great.
Yeah.
And I will not know what object you took. I'll be leaving the room when you take one of those objects.
The ring or the watch? I'm really tempted to take them both.
Is the ring in your locker?
No.
Did you take the ring?
No.
Did you steal the ring?
No.
Was the ring stolen?
No.
Did you hide the ring?
No.
Did you steal
Next
the ring?
came a
No.
practice
Is the ring with your
session when I
possessions?
honed my skill
Is
at
there a stolen
denying
ring in your
everything,
locker?
No.
which of
Did you
course
take
meant
the
that
ring
half the
out of your
time I'm lying.
Did you put the ring in your locker?
No.
Did you leave the ring in the drawer?
Yes.
Did the ring stay in the drawer?
Yes.
Was the ring moved from the drawer?
Not by me.
Did you hide the watch in your locker?
No.
Did you remove a watch from the drawer?
No.
Did you steal a watch from the drawer?
You gotta get a rubber hose, you know? Make this go much faster.
This right here is the keypad.
Now it's time for the brain scan. The keypad will allow me to answer yes or no as the questions are projected onto a screen above my face. While I'm in the scanner, you get the pleasure of seeing my brain revealed. This is a structural scan. But once the questions start coming, the machine will be making repeated scans to see how different parts of my brain are responding as I answer. This type of brain scan is called a functional MRI, and it's the key technology we'll be encountering as we explore how neuroscientists are probing brains. The scanner creates images of multiple slices through the brain, picking out regions where a cluster of nerve cells, among the several billion in the brain, is working especially hard. Harder working cells need more blood to fuel them. This extra blood flowing through the nest of capillaries surrounding the nerve cells generates a magnetic signal. And it's this signal, an indirect measure of nerve cell activity, that the fMRI machine detects and displays. It took Steve Lakin about an hour using his patented computer algorithms to figure out where the blood was flowing most in my brain while I was answering those seemingly endless questions about rings and watches.
So I hear you have a result.
I do. I do have a result. Are you interested in seeing how you did?
Yeah.
Or maybe I should say how I did?
Yeah, right.
The red indicates areas of the brain that was more active when you were answering, in this case, ring questions on the bottom here. And on the top here, this is your brain answering more. This is when you have more activation answering watch questions.
Figuring out from these brain slices what's going on where is tough for the uninitiated. So throughout this show, we'll be using our own transparent brain to see where the scans reveal increased activity. Steve Lakin focuses on 3 areas that he argues have to work harder when someone is telling a lie. In my case, these regions showed more activity when I was answering the ring questions than the watch questions. So,
What do you think I took out of the drawer?
The computer made the determination that you took the ring.
Uh-huh. You want to find out if I did?
I do. All right. Very good.
You look a little relieved.
Am I always relieved? Sure. Absolutely. You know, we do impact people's lives with what we do. Much more, much more important than rings and watches. And, when we get these things right, when we do this, it does lend credibility to what we're doing when it really does make a difference. Yeah, go back this way.
of course, Steve Lakin had a 50-50 chance of catching my lie, even if his method doesn't really work. Though he claims an accuracy of some 90% in experiments with volunteer subjects like me. The key question is how my little fib about the ring compares to real-world lies.
I would call that an instructed falsehood. You were told to remove either the ring or the watch.
Yes.
And you were told what to say, to say what you had done. And this bears very little relationship to the way that functional MRI lie detection would be used as evidence in court if it was ever going to be used.
Right.
Right.
Now-
So in a real case, you would have a person for whom very much is at stake, not $25 for participating in an experiment, but for example, life imprisonment. Right. That it makes a very big difference because when you're anxious, there's all kinds of brain activity that happens from anxiety that is in a totally different ballpark from the situation you were in.
Aren't you under more pressure, and wouldn't that be revealed when your life is
You're
at
saying
stake?
it would work even better in a real-world
Well,
situation.
that's my question, yeah.
I doubt it for the following reason. If you are innocent and you are being asked about the very thing you're suspected of, you're going to be just as anxious as you are if you're guilty of it. These guys are going to do, one scan and make a pronouncement. It's crazy.
You do throw a lot of cold water on them.
I think it's really irresponsible to use anything like this method anytime soon.
Because it could cause innocent people to go to jail?
Absolutely, and because I think there's an aura that, oh, it's MRI evidence, the brain doesn't lie. Well, this is garbage, right? The brain doesn't lie, maybe, but the signal that's being used is a noisy, feeble, error-prone, very indirect measure of anything, which has not been established as a good measure of a lie. And to use this method to try to tell whether somebody's guilty or innocent is insane.
As our filming of the trial continues, I'm going to be talking from time to time with law professor Nita Farahani, who has closely followed how neuroscience may affect the law. We started by picking up on the issue of brain scans for lie detection.
How useful is it to bring this kind of lie detection into the court?
Well, it's interesting. If you compare it to traditional lie detection technology, the polygraph, we have excluded polygraph testimony for a long time from the criminal courtroom because it's so unreliable. And the question is, does this do something better? Is looking at the brain instead of the indirect measures of things like sweat and heart palpitations, is that better than the existing polygraph method? And the answer is probably not. Every time we introduce new science into the courtroom, there's an overconfidence by jurors in the science as if that's the objective truth, right? That science has found the objective answer and that they don't have to do the hard work of trying to figure out if the person's telling a truth or a lie because the science tells us that. And it doesn't. It's one more subjective piece of information that informs our decision making. And so a lot of neuroscientists are worried about over-reliance by jurors and over-influence to jurors in the use of this kind of evidence.
So if the preponderance of scientists are worried about introducing these techniques into the courtroom,
right,
are they closer to getting accepted than they ought to be? Or is there still a pretty good barrier about it now?
Well, so there have been several cases so far where judges have actually heard fMRI evidence. And in each of the cases, the judges have been incredibly careful in the opinions that they've written to explain why they don't think that this evidence, fMRI lie detection, reaches a level of reliability and general acceptance in the scientific community that would enable it to be permitted into a criminal case. Nevertheless, as the evidence improves, as the techniques improve, there's no reason to think that it won't one day end up in the criminal courtroom.
Back in our courtroom, the next witness called by the prosecution, the store owner whose wife was shot, is about to give his version of what happened that night.
As you can see, I was talking to my wife. She was sitting in the office. I was counting some coins, and 3 young men stormed in. 2 of them came towards me. One of them was carrying a gun, and he pointed it right at my face. They were demanding that I give them the money. I'm telling him, put the gun down, take anything, take everything in the store. I will give you the money. I was reaching to give him the money.
And as the 2 men were yelling and screaming at you, and one of them has a gun pointed at you, where's your focus? Where are you looking?
I was looking right at him, right at the gun.
At him, the guy, at the gun, or the man holding the gun?
At the man and at the gun.
What happens next?
When they shifted their focus to the office, I knew that my wife had come out. And all I could think of, please stay inside. And as soon as I looked at her, they had shot her already.
Now, would you recognize the man who was the young man who was pointing the gun at you if you saw him again?
Yes.
Looking around the courtroom, do you see that young man here today?
He is sitting in the front desk wearing green shirt.
I have no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, the events that we're talking about here happen rapidly, correct?
Correct.
You said that you see the man pointing the gun directly at you, right?
In my face, yes.
The gun is in your face. What do you see? The gun? Or are you looking to make an assessment of who's holding the gun?
They were both yelling at me. I had to look at them. I had to talk to them, not to the gun. So I was looking at their faces. As you can see in the video, I'm putting my hands up, telling them, please put the gun down, looking at them.
Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Can we believe the store owner's eyes? What if we could peer into his brain to see if he truly does recognize the shooter?
So how did you go from...
Nita Farahani and I have come to Stanford University to see if we can use her brain to answer the question, can a brain scan decode her memory and tell whether or not she's seen a face before? Nita first looks at a set of 200 faces for just 2 seconds per face.
And will my brain remember things that I don't? Your brain might remember things that you don't.
Wow.
There might be signatures of memory in your brain.
Nita, you ready? You ready to go into the tube?
I am. I'm ready to go in.
Oh, good luck.
Thank you.
Nita settles in for what will be over 2 hours in the MRI machine, while I get to watch with the memory decoder's inventor, Stanford's Anthony Wagner.
And she's going to have to decide for each face on the screen while she's in the scanner, does she recognize it as a face she's recently seen, or is it novel?
Okay, Nita, so this is where we're going to be collecting the brain data of whether you are remembering or whether you're seeing a brand new face.
This time, Nita again sees each face for just 2 seconds, then gets 8 seconds to decide if it's new or familiar. Meanwhile, the MRI is taking scans 2 seconds apart.
Are you looking into her brain specifically focusing on certain areas, or are you looking at patterns of activity all over the brain?
For this study, we're looking at patterns of activity all over the brain. We could look in specific areas, but what we're doing is we're looking at the pattern throughout the brain. Every face she's encountering is generating this complex pattern of activity.
So does that mean that when she recognizes a face that she's seen before, and consciously recognizes it, that's a pattern that shows up pretty much any time she recognizes a face that she's seen before?
Any time is a strong statement.
Okay.
I would,
a lot of the time.
A lot of the time.
Yeah.
So the work that we've done thus far, what we've shown is that on average about 80% of the time,
oh, that's a lot.
We can accurately classify an old face that's recognized as old, and distinguish that pattern from a new face that's perceived as novel.
It sounds like a fingerprint of recognition, not a fingerprint of a face, but of recognition.
That's right. I think what we're looking at is the neural fingerprint or the neural patterns associated with the conscious experience of recognizing a stimulus like a face. That begins to crack open the door. Maybe we would be tempted to use this in the real world.
In a courtroom with it.
Exactly.
Okay, Nita, fantastic job. So if you felt comfortable on that
Worried about cracking open that door to the real world prematurely, Anthony and his team are now actively trying to break their own system.
So the goal of this study now is to see whether our memory decoding methods can work even when you're intentionally trying to conceal your memories for the faces.
Nita is given several tips on how to try to fool the memory decoder. One is to focus on the technical aspects of the photograph rather than the face itself. Another, when seeing a new face, is to remember someone it reminds her of. After another grueling hour in the scanner, with her brain probably spinning, Nita is finally freed.
Yeah, okay. Excellent. So come on out.
All right.
Careful.
Okay.
Hey, bravo. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you.
How did
it all
you
go?
do?
I don't know. It seemed like I couldn't remember very much, but I don't know. You'll tell me, right?
Okay, well, Tiffany's working on that right now.
While the numbers were being crunched, we all got to admire Nita's brain, which turned out to have flashed a signal of recognition well above chance while she was trying hard to cooperate.
That's exciting. And this white matter
But in the
here
second
is
experiment, when she was deliberately trying to confuse the decoder, its success rate fell to chance.
so as we
Anthony said before that this is a way to make sure that it's not going out into the real world prematurely and to discover in advance ways it can be defeated.
Right.
So this must have some bearing on how you feel about this kind of work entering into the justice system.
I think I agree with Anthony that we really want to know how good this data is before we imagine it in the justice system. But I can already see ways in which it could be useful we rely very heavily on eyewitness testimony, for example, in the criminal justice system, and it tends to be one of the things that is the most flawed. So trying to determine the likelihood that a person actually saw a face that they claim to have seen, and that it is that face and not some similar face, can be really important. A conviction or exoneration of a person in the criminal justice system.
In our courtroom, we're about to hear from the customer in the store who may not have seen the shooter's face, but certainly witnessed the shooting.
I heard a loud bang.
Bang like a gunshot?
I'm not sure. I'd never heard a gunshot before.
And then what happened after the loud bang?
I saw the poor woman hit the floor. And she went down. I just can't get the sound of her hitting that floor out of my head.
You were in fear for your safety, correct?
Correct.
Your heart is pumping. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
You're trying to get out of that store, right?
Right.
And all of these events were happening within moments of each other at a time period where you were scared to death. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And all of a sudden you hear a shot?
Yes.
Did you look in the direction of the shot?
Yes.
You saw a lady fall to the ground, correct?
Yes.
No further questions.
Could a memory decoder one day confirm or contradict the account of an eyewitness? Back at Stanford, Anthony Wagner's team is testing a technology that one day may be able to do just that.
Well, we're trying to move from laboratory-based memories and trying to detect brain patterns associated with laboratory-based memories to brain patterns associated with more real-world, real-life memories. And so Melina, who's going to be the subject here, she's been wearing a digital camera around her neck for the last week. And the digital camera automatically snaps images, photos, throughout a day. And it takes thousands of photos in a day, many thousands of photos in a week. And what we're going to do is we're going to present her little snippets of her life, little snippets of the events that
Just
occurred.
still pictures?
Just still pictures.
Yeah.
A sequence of 4 still pictures that encompass or is a cue back to a brief moment in her recent past. We're going to present still pictures from somebody else's camera. And so those are the foils, right? Those are not her memories.
So she might not know that they're not her memories, or
we'll see.
It's early days yet, but this probing of the memory of scenes is suggesting that a brain scan could distinguish a place that's recognized from one that isn't.
If you get that really developed to a reliable place, then you can show me a picture of the crime scene that I claim never to have been present at, and you can tell me, I don't think so. You're recognizing this place.
Potentially, right? But that's the end state. That's the goal of this class of work.
It's not going to happen next week, but to the outside world, like me, it sounds an awful lot like you're getting very close to being able to read our minds. Are you?
It depends on what you mean by read our minds. We are getting close to being able to say whether or not you're recognizing the thing in front of you. But we may never get there for the uncooperative subject.
Somebody who's gaming the system.
To the extent that you can beat the system by adopting a strategy that masks your memory patterns, then we may not ultimately get to that goal.
In our courtroom, the defense has called its only witness, 18-year-old Melody Brown.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Now, on April 4th, were you at home that evening?
Yes.
And tell the jury who was there with you.
My mom left, and Jimmy was with me.
And when you say Jimmy, who are you referring to?
My boyfriend, Jimmy Moran.
All right, and you recognize him in the courtroom?
Mm-hmm.
Where is he?
He's over there.
Your Honor, record reflect. Witness identified Jimmy Moran?
Yes.
Do you love Jimmy?
Yeah, I do.
And would you testify to help him? Because you love him?
Well, I don't want anything bad to happen to him, so yeah, I want to help him, but I'm not going to lie for him.
No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now let me take you to the night of April 4th. You say you were at home?
Yeah.
And you were home all night with your boyfriend who you love, Jimmy?
Yes.
And no one else was home at night with you then, right?
No, my mom went to work and my sister was out.
What were you doing with Jimmy around 11:30 p.m.?
We were just watching movies. We usually have a Friday movie night, so.
Oh, what movie were we watching?
I don't remember. It was some comedy.
Are you clear that on April 4th, Jimmy was with you and you were watching some comedy?
Yes.
What were you doing on Saturday, April 5th at 11:30 p.m.?
I was at home,
What were you doing there at home?
just hanging out.
Just hanging out? Were you watching movies? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
But you're very clear on what happened on Friday, April 4th at 11:30 p.m. watching a comedy, is that right?
Yes.
The question now is whether Melody Brown's alibi for Jimmy is believed by the jury. Complicating that question is her race. Racial bias is one of the thorniest problems confronting the judicial system. Usually, unlike in our case, when the defendant is black.
Nita, how big a problem is race bias in the courtroom?
It's impossible for us to quantify, but we do think it is a tremendous problem in the criminal justice system. And this has been a matter of study from a number of scientists, from psychology and more recently from neuroscientists, to try to understand what's motivating the bias. And the studies have shown that out-group versus in-group. So out-group is if somebody is not somebody who I identify with. So they're not within my familial group. They're not within my ethnicity or race. That I am less likely to empathize with that person. And I'm less likely to believe that person. And so therefore, less likely to be influenced by the kind of evidence that they might otherwise introduce. And if we think about the criminal justice system and our goal and our hope of having a really objective system, right? If the point is to try to find the truth of what really happened, and what's going on behind the scenes is we actually are biased, and so we're unable to get to that kind of objective truth, and it's a real problem.
Can you please move back a little bit? Okay.
I'm sitting in a tiny room at New York University having electrodes taped to my face for an experiment designed to uncover racial bias, even in people like me who like to believe they have no racial bias. All I knew as the test began was that I kept hearing loud bangs in my headphones.
So what was happening in there? What was going on?
So what we were doing was measuring your eye blink startle response. When you hear a loud noise, you startle. It's just a natural reflex. You can't help it. But what we know is that startle reflex is tapped in to brain circuitry that's involved in emotional responding and fear. So if you're in a slightly fearful state, and just very subtly fearful, right, not that you're actually feeling fear, you're going to startle more. And what we found is that for Caucasian Americans, they will startle slightly more when they're viewing an African American versus another white American. And this just is indicative of a slight emotional response that is not related to what you tell me your race attitudes are. And in this way, it's sort of an implicit measure of race bias.
Can you tell me what Jeffrey is looking at now?
Jeffrey is looking at just faces, black and white faces. And much like upstairs when you did that task, he's simply asked to press a button if a face is repeated.
The brain circuitry involved in fear and that is behind the eye blink startle reflex centers on a brain region called the amygdala. So to see if she could find telltale traces of race bias directly within a person's brain, Liz chose the amygdala as her first target.
So in the test I took before, I was measuring my eye blinks. You were seeing what the amygdala was doing through it causing me to blink.
Yes.
Now you're looking at the amygdala itself?
That is what this experiment was trying to see if we could do that.
And
So
did it work?
Well, it didn't quite work for the amygdala. It worked for another brain region called the fusiform face area.
Fusiform face area.
Yeah. So the fusiform.
What's that mean?
The fusiform face area is a part of the brain we've known for a long time. Shows more activation to faces than other things.
Where is it? Where would it be on me?
With you, it'd be sort of somewhere back here, going in a little bit, maybe a little bit, around your ear, a little behind you.
Do most other people have it there too?
Yeah, so
Good.
it kind of moves around from person to person. So what we actually do is we show people a bunch of faces versus scrambled faces to find where exactly it is in you. It's the same general region of the brain,
Yes.
but the exact region moves around a little bit.
I see. So then once you identify it in a person, when that lights up, when they see someone of another race, it tells you something?
What we see is that we can predict, not with a high degree of accuracy, so this would not hold up in legal standards,
Yeah.
right? But slightly above chance
Yeah.
if somebody shows a strong implicit bias.
Now, it's important to point out that Liz Phelps does not foresee a day when jurors will be required to have a brain scan before they can serve. What she does hope is that by putting volunteer research subjects in a scanner, she could monitor their brain's telltale signals of bias while testing possible ways to reduce them. Likely interventions could be as simple as a video of a judge urging jury members to be aware that they may be biased, or video of a positive role model like our distinguished defense attorney. Interventions that work in the lab to reduce the brain's signals of bias may then be recommended for real-life trials.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the evidence in this case. And now we will hear closing arguments of counsel.
You all may remember when we started this trial, Mr. Rico told you that this is a case about tragedy. And you've now heard the evidence, and it is a tragedy. A woman lies brain dead, Mrs. Shari El-Az, because she was shot in the head by the defendant. But let's talk about the evidence here and the facts. And even if there were any doubt at this point, beyond all the consistent testimony of the witnesses and beyond the surveillance video, you have a positive, 100% positive identification from the one who would know best, Mr. El-Az, who was only a couple feet away, looking face to face with the defendant, Jimmy Moran. Now let's talk about another witness who was on that stand where there is no evidence to corroborate her and why you can't believe her. Let's talk about Melody Brown, the girlfriend who loves him. And, well, you can't necessarily fault her for it. You can certainly know why it is that she came here to lie for him. As she said herself, she takes him in, she has taken him in, she'll do what she has to do to protect him, and she does what she has to do to keep him out of trouble. And Jimmy, he's in trouble now. But he's in trouble because of what he did and because of his actions.
Could what a defendant did at the scene of a crime one day be recovered by scanning his brain?
Now, the brain is scrunched up inside the skull normally, which is inconvenient, so we can inflate it and rotate it around and then flatten it out. And when we flatten it out, we end up with something that's essentially about the size of a large pizza, except it's a brain-shaped pizza.
You're describing my brain.
Everybody's brain, not just yours.
I'm visiting the University of California, Berkeley, where Jack Gallant has been putting people into scanners to watch movies while measuring the activity of some 30,000 points all over the brain's surface.
On this surface of this brain, you can now see that the blue areas are places where there's less brain activity, and the red areas have more brain activity.
As the movies play, the images generate responses across the entire cortex. Some regions respond especially strongly. For instance, when there are faces in the movie, the fusiform face recognition area lights up. When the images are of places, a nearby region known to be involved in place recognition activates. But for every image, many, if not all, of the 30,000 points in the brain being recorded respond to a greater or lesser extent, building what Jack Gallant likes to call a world brain dictionary.
Now, once you have a world brain dictionary for each point on the brain, you can convert that into a brain world dictionary. And that allows you to take some measurements of brain activity later on and essentially infer what movie people saw.
This is, am I hearing you right? Are you saying you can look at the activity in the brain, not knowing what picture the person was looking at during that activity, and you can reconstruct the picture from that activity?
It's not a perfect representation of the picture.
But you get some kind of fuzzy picture that looks a lot like it?
The fuzzy pictures are actually the result of combining images from a collection of 5,000 hours of video downloaded at random from YouTube. Jack Gallant's computer algorithm looks for images that best match the subject's brain patterns generated in the scanner.
If the image is something really common like a face, then we actually get a pretty good reconstruction of a fuzzy face or a person that you can see. If the reconstruction is of something more abstract, like this sort of ink blob here, then there's nothing that we can do to reconstruct that fairly well.
But here's an elephant. There are a lot of elephants.
There are a lot of elephants, but there weren't in our reconstruction library. So the elephant here just looks like a shambling mound.
Decoding from brain patterns what a person is seeing while in the scanner led Jack Gallant to wonder if he could decode what someone was imagining seeing, if he could decode an image in a subject's mind.
One of my postdocs, Thomas Nasaleris, spent a week memorizing 4 images. He would sit at his desk and he would just stare at these images for hours and hours, trying to form the perfect visual image in his brain. And then he went into the magnet and we would just put up a word that keyed that image. So for example, one of the images he remembered was the Mona Lisa. And so we would put up the word the Mona Lisa and he would form a visual image of this, and we would try to see if we could reconstruct the Mona Lisa by searching through the Flickr database for the image that was most similar to the one that he was imagining. And that's this result here. So on the top here you can see the image he was visualizing was the Mona Lisa, and our decoded reconstructionist Salma Hayek. Here's a soldier that he memorized, and we decoded a jockey. And here's a cat, and we're decoding a dog. And here's a bunch of vegetables, and we decode a bunch of vegetables.
So might we one day be able to peer into the brain of a defendant and decode the visual images he has stored there, in effect to unlock his own memory of the crime scene?
Does your ability to look into his brain and see if he's seeing the place, someday can that be useful in this kind of a case? Let's say we're years ahead now and we have that capability. Could that be used in this case?
Well, I think the ability to record latent memories is going to be very far in the future. So if he had the information sort of stored in his brain somewhere, but he wasn't accessing it right now, it would be very difficult to read that out. But I don't see any reason why in the next few decades you're not going to be able to read out, say, visual imagery, so as people are spontaneously recalling memories. So if you manage to prime his memory so that he was thinking about the crime or the crime scene, you can imagine a technology that would read that out of the brain.
In the early phase of this, I can picture a lawyer holding up a fuzzy picture to the jury and say, now, this is the picture of what we say it is. And there's a little bit of interpretation that goes into that.
We can only hope that doesn't happen.
But if you take the fuzzy pictures, I mean, just to play, devil's advocate here for a minute, suppose we had the fuzzy pictures from our defendant and we could actually look at his memory of that evening. And we had fuzzy pictures that roughly look like the outline of a store clerk and of the actual scene that we then have captured via videotape. And it's fuzzy, but you put them side by side and the defendant says, I wasn't there, I've never been there, and I don't know what you're talking about. But you're able to actually see a pretty fuzzy image that looks similar to the one that's on the video.
Your Honor, this young man, I represent this young man, and I'm going to show you a picture of a convenience store just down the block where he has been many times and admits to being there many times. Is the fuzzy picture of that going to be the same as a fuzzy picture of the scene of the crime?
Well, so you would have effective cross-examination just like you do for any scientific evidence, but it seems like having the opportunity to evaluate it and say, look, actually the setup is really quite different than the convenience store down the street, and the the shirt color of the store clerk and the setup of the, it's much, so it's going to be subject to interpretation, but it seems like it's better than just the testimony of the defendant. It might be actually really quite helpful evidence.
I hope so. But the impression I'm getting is that it's just one more thing to argue about, and the better rhetoric is liable to win the day.
But quite apart from whether looking inside the brain of a defendant like Jimmy's could yield useful evidence, there's also the question of whether it would be allowed under the Fifth Amendment.
What the right against self-incrimination does is it protects you from being forced to testify against yourself, to be a witness against yourself in a case. If the idea of the right against self-incrimination is that we can't force you to respond to questions, and I put you into an fMRI, and you're utterly silent, you don't say a word, but I ask you a series of questions like, did you do this? And I'm measuring your response from your brain. That feels a lot like testifying. And so it seems like this whole area of constitutional law is going to have to be rethought. We're not at the point where we can really compel a person's brain to cooperate with, police yet. But you could imagine a scenario where it would happen. So it wouldn't be putting the person into the fMRI and immobilizing them. It would be the point at which this technology could be something more remote, right? So rather than you being aware of me using it, I could be reading the blood oxygenation levels in your brain, or using something like functional near-infrared technology to be reading your responses as I'm asking you a series of questions. And then the question is, does the Constitution do anything to safeguard you against that?
Yeah, I mean, the more you describe these techniques getting better, more efficient, more reliable, the more I wonder, how different is that from Big Brother looking into our heads?
Well, a lot of people are worried about that, because if you think that technology could get to the point where it's used on the unsuspecting person,
yes,
and the kind of enclave of private life, this what's going on in my head that I've always thought, well, I can think it as long as I don't say it, I'm safe.
Yeah.
That just might not be true anymore, but it's a long ways off.
I started by saying to you all, you can't unfortunately look into the minds of witnesses. You can't look into the mind of Jimmy Moran. But in this case, you have the beautiful opportunity to look at the videotape. And what you'll see in the videotape is that that shot is happening as he turns around. It's less than 1 second. And from that less than 1 second, Mr. Ken wants you to believe that Jimmy Moran is the male Annie Oakley, a sharpshooter of the highest order. And there's no such testimony of that. The testimony in this case by Tommy Quinn, Mr. Ken talked about what you could believe from Tommy Quinn. This is what you could believe from Tommy Quinn. Nothing.
Despite trying to undermine Tommy Quinn's credibility, Tony Rico seems to have decided that he won't convince the jury that Jimmy wasn't the shooter, and he's now focused on the most serious charge against his client, that of attempted murder, whether Jimmy shot the clerk's wife deliberately.
If you decide it was Jimmy Moran, or whoever you decide, the shooter, in that 1 split second, it would be wonderful, again, if we could look into his mind and be able to examine what's happening, so we could get a sense as to whether or not this was something done in fright or if it was something done intentionally.
Deciding whether Jimmy intended to kill the clerk's wife or whether there was a dreadful accident is likely to be the key question for the jury as it retires to deliberate. What will be going on in their brains? In a brain scanner at MIT, a subject is wrestling with a similar moral dilemma.
Okay, Nick, if you're ready, we're going to do another run of that task where you're reading stories and making moral judgments. If you're ready, can you push the 1 button? Great, here we go.
Nick, the subject in the scanner, is being given a series of stories to read. Running the experiment is MIT's Rebecca Sachs.
Okay, so we're posing him basically little moral dilemmas. He's going to read a short story that tells him about something that happened, and at the end of it, somebody does an action. For example, somebody puts white powder in a cup of coffee. And the question for him is that morally okay, or does that person deserve moral blame for putting the white powder in the coffee? Now that, of course, depends what the white powder is and whose coffee it is.
And did they mean to cause any harm with the white powder?
Exactly.
In this story, the white powder is poison in a packet labeled sugar. In one scenario, the perpetrator puts the powder in the coffee, knowing it actually to be poison. In another version, he does it believing it really is sugar. In both cases, the victim dies. Astonishingly, Rebecca can tell which version Nick in the scanner is thinking about.
What we've discovered is that there's a pattern of activity in one particular brain region. And in that pattern, we can tell whether he's thinking about somebody harming someone else on purpose or accidentally.
And you have a wonderful name for that region. What?
We do,
I can never
although no one
remember.
can ever remember
I can't
it.
remember.
Yeah.
What is it?
So it's above and behind your right ear,
Okay.
and it's called the right temporoparietal junction.
The right temporoparietal junction.
Yeah, it's a terrible
It sounds
name.
like the name of a TV show.
Exactly.
We described for Rebecca what happened at our crime scene and the crucial moment when Jimmy turned and fired. Was it with intent to kill or as a panicky accident?
So that is exactly the kind of example that poses a really interesting, hard problem for this brain
Especially
region.
for the jury and the judge. What
Right.
was he thinking? Did he do this with any sense of deliberateness?
So you could imagine that if you could look inside the brain of the jury or the judge while they're thinking about that,
Yeah.
their right TPJ, this brain region, would be getting quite a workout trying to
Yeah.
figure out when he did that, did he know there was a person there? Did he intend to hurt the person? Did he intend to pull the trigger of the gun? Did he know that the gun was loaded? When you're figuring out if he should be blamed for what happened, you've got to really be considering in that moment what was inside his head.
Inside Nick's head in the scanner, his right temporoparietal junction is also working overtime as he wrestles with a series of stories where serious harm is caused. The amazing part is that within this tiny brain region, the fMRI can pick up one pattern if he thinks the harm was accidental, and another if he thinks the harm was intended.
This is where the story is clearly accidental.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about the accident that occurred.
Yeah.
Here, the story is clearly
on purpose.
on purpose.
Yeah.
What a completely different picture that is. And this is a different story from this.
Exactly.
But they're both intentional harm.
Exactly.
And it's almost exactly the same pattern.
So that's exactly what we're talking about.
That's really amazing that you have such a clear picture of it.
But another thing that makes this pattern so neat is that these patterns are different from one person to another. So if I looked for this pattern in your brain, or if I looked for it in my brain, or if I looked at it in each of the 12 jurors' brains, each one of the jurors would have a slightly different pattern. And one thing that's interesting is it turns out that how different these two kinds of things look in your brain is directly related to how different you say they are in your moral judgments. So if you had a brain like this, where the pattern for accidents is really different from the pattern for intentional harms, you would say that accidents are much less bad than intentional actions. But if I picked another juror, somebody in whom the patterns are more similar, they would say accidents are almost as bad as intentional action. You hurt her so badly that you were totally morally wrong anyway. And we can see that difference between people by looking at how much of a difference there is in the patterns in their brain.
Let me clear something up. You don't look forward to the day where jurors will be put in this machine. You're just telling us what's going on in their head when they do this.
Yeah,
This
if
is-
you want to find out whether a juror thinks that this action was done intentionally or accidentally, there's a much cheaper way than fMRI to find out. You just ask them, right? But when people go to make moral judgments, each of us brings to that the details of the current situation and all of our past experience. And so the reason you have 12 jurors is because everybody's going to bring a slightly different reasonableness, a slightly different experience of the problem. And what we trust is that if you've got 12 different viewpoints, 12 slightly different right TPJs, 12 slightly different brains in every other way, that what they'll come up with together is a reasonably fair decision.
Madam Foreperson, please rise. Has the jury reached a verdict?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please hand the verdict envelope to my bailiff, who will hand it to me. You say that on the charge of armed robbery, you find the defendant guilty. Is that correct?
Yes.
You say on the charge of aggravated assault in the first degree, you find the defendant guilty. Is that correct?
Yes.
You say that on the charge of attempted murder, you find the defendant not guilty. Is that correct?
Yes.
Please be seated. Juror number 2, is that your verdict?
In finding Jimmy Moran guilty of armed robbery and aggravated assault, the jury clearly had no doubts that he was the shooter.
Is that your verdict?
But by clearing him of attempted murder, the jury must have been convinced by defense counsel Tony Rico's argument that his client didn't intend to kill the store clerk's wife.
Jury unanimous.
And while the science we've seen has provided some fascinating insights into how people's brains work, So far, none of that science is likely to have affected the verdict. Many experts think that's likely to change in the future if the sort of mind-reading technology we've seen continues to accelerate. Meanwhile, in our trial, the jury's job is done. The issue that remains is Jimmy's punishment. And this is a question that has seen brain science already entering the courtroom. The focus next will be on just what was going on in Jimmy's brain when he pulled the trigger. Next time on Brains on Trial, we'll hear from Jimmy himself.
I've been a bad kid my whole life.
We'll see how neuroscience reveals why the teenage brain is both impulsive and primed for trouble. Are we in danger of saying that, as far as culpability is concerned, that he's not really guilty, his brain made him do it? And we'll learn Jimmy's fate.
All right. The court is prepared to impose sentence.
Major funding for Brains on Trial was provided by
the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, supporting original research and public understanding of science, technology, and economics.
Additional funding was provided by the Cheryl and Philip Milstein family. Continue investigating Brains on Trial online at pbs.org/Brains on Trial. Brains on Trial is available on DVD. To order, visit shoppbs.org or call 1-800-PLAY-PBS.